So, a radio interview. We may be number 2 on Twitter. We're number 1 in radio, baby. So it's all good. So the great part about this panel, a lot of people are talking about going digital. I think the Trailblazer panel is all about going digital and affecting change in your school systems across the country. So let me start with a question. Let's start from the beginning. Dr. Nemko, as Hall mentioned, 4th term now in Napa County as superintendent. Where do you get started?
Well, we were very fortunate because we started way back in 1991 and opened New Technology High School in 1996, which was the first new tech high in the country. And now there are something like 100 and something replications of it. And I would love to say that it was my vision that made that happen, but I would be lying to you, and I will never lie to a group of distinguished educators. Actually, New Technology High School got started because we had a business education partnership, and we had spent about a year dancing around each other and trying to figure out each other's culture, and the business people could not understand us. We move at the speed of education, and they move at the speed of business, and those are very different speeds. And they said to us, we have a real problem because we cannot hire your graduates. They don't have the skills to do the jobs that we need people to do. They are not creative problem solvers. They are looking for the right answer, and there is no one right answer. And so they challenged us to start a new kind of high school that would prepare students for the workforce that they were actually going to be in. And so then it's still, even with their pushing and prodding, took us another 5 years to open it. But the whole premise of the school was students have to do problem solving on real world things, but they also need the same technology that every business person has every day. Imagine in a business if you tell them, okay, now you're going to walk down the hall to the computer lab on Wednesdays from 10 to 11, that's your computer time. But that's what we were doing in schools. So that's how New Tech got started.
That's great. So Dr. Clark, same question. You're superintendent of the fastest growing school in Idaho. How does that begin for you?
Well, like Barbara and Napa, we've been involved in technology for a long time, since the early 80s, mostly through top-down sort of initiatives. And we had computer labs and computers in all of our buildings. But some sort of strange things had come together in Idaho, and we were at the place where we really couldn't do a top-down initiative. And what I recognized is that I had a lot of early innovators who'd been looking for grant money, places, trying things. And so our approach and the most important things that we're doing now are fueled by a commitment to honor those early innovators, to step out and identify both individual teachers and whole buildings. And so we have planted pilots around our district to see what works and what context. I don't believe it's as easy today as it was in the 1980s when we decided to go with a single platform. Because one size doesn't fit all. And so we identified those folks, we honored the grants they had gotten outside, and we offered them district grants to do that work. And so we have some very exciting pilots going on around the district. I appreciated all of what Jim said earlier, but one of the things really hit home. Today, we're looking at how we scale up those projects. So our next round of grant money that we'll make available will be for folks who already have gotten a technology grant of some kind, and how we can expand that. So it's a little bit different approach for us. We have tended to be initiative driven. This is working really well because now the teachers are, when are the next grants coming? Where can I find a grant? When will we get ours? Can we expand this in our building? And it's taken on its own life.
Excellent. Great, thank you. Dr. Patton, so I think you're one of the largest districts in the country that has actually adopted and implemented digital textbooks through a traditional textbook adoption process in a state. When you first started down this path, how did you envision measuring success? What did that look like to you? And I'm curious as if that's changed as you're into it now.
Things do change because you have one vision of how it is until reality hits, and then you kind of adjust. But that's what's great, is that it does keep changing. Technology keeps changing. But I think the idea of success is to watch the kids. So if we can see that the kids are engaged more, that their attendance is even higher, and there are less discipline issues, those are things that we can actually see. Then we're very data-driven folks. So in your example of our digital tech book that we're so thrilled to have partnered with and developed it alongside of you guys, you've built in a lot of metrics for us to be able to monitor, so we can actually keep track of how often, who's using it, how often the kids are used inside, outside of the school walls. So we actually can watch all that. We've watched the meter change just as we had hoped it would. From the, for instance, the digital streaming piece that was super, super high, far outweighed the use of the non-video streaming pieces, and now we see that meter coming around the other way, which is great. That means they're using the assessments. They're accessing many different parts of the tech book now, and so that's terrific. And so we feel that we're very fortunate to have that opportunity and to roll it out so large, but I think in how we did that is what's important, and it's the teachers. It always comes down to that classroom teacher and their comfort, because like everybody, digital natives, digital immigrants, most of our teachers are still veteran. You get some new young ones that are on the outside of the digital natives, but many veteran teachers, so how do you make them switch? So that work with the teachers is what's so important.
Great. And we're going to get back to, there's a lot of questions online about professional development. I'm anxious to ask this group. But before we get there, Don, I think you deserve a medal. Don is the non-superintendent on our two panels today. He's the chief financial officer in Albuquerque. So a round of applause for our CFO amongst this group, if you will. I don't know, brave, I don't know what the right word is, Don, but.
In over my head.
So Albuquerque Public, a large digital initiative last year in multiple subjects around digital content. I'm curious, when you look at it from your lens, is your measure of success different than maybe Superintendent Brooks?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, I'm very, very much interested in student achievement. That's number one. But I also look at it in terms of the return on the investment, not only with respect to digital textbooks, but also the savings that we'll garner by the use of digital textbooks. When our chief academic officer came to me when we first began this initiative, of course, you know, she always came hat in hand and her hand open saying, "I need more money, Don." And I'm like, "God, we don't have any. Come on, Linda, give me a break." But she said, "No, I'm actually going to, I'm sorry, okay. I'm actually going to save you money this time." And I said, "Okay, I'm all ears. Let me hear about it." So I think that when she began talking about how we were going to do science, math, or science, social studies, and health, we were going to catch up on 3 adoptions that had been woefully underfunded for many years. We were behind on many of those adoptions because the legislature simply hadn't appropriated the funds to buy them. And we were supplementing the instructional materials budget from the operating budget to the tune of about $500,000 or more a year. She said, all that's going to go away and we're going to catch up on these adoptions. I thought, okay, well, there's a good thing. And then she talked a little bit about how the investment that we'd made years earlier with respect to smart boards would really begin to pay off. Perhaps maybe some of the teachers who weren't using them were going to have to roll them out, dust them off, and really begin to use them with digital textbooks. So again, long-winded answer to the question, forgive me, is really the return on the investment and the savings is how I would look at it.
You know, I'd love to start with you with kind of this next round of questioning, which is about stakeholder groups, because I think, again, you might have a different perspective. Who were the stakeholder groups? When you started to go down this path, did you have a different type of stakeholder as you went digital?
We did. And actually, we leveraged it. And we didn't realize it was a stakeholder group, but it was our business community by and large. We just completed or just finished a bond and mill levy election this last February, a very successful one. We were 79% on the bond approval and 72% on the mill levy, which was really good for a large urban school district. But we realized that our community was the biggest stakeholder. And when we talked about the need to use our bond and mill levy funds for technology, we pointed to digital tech books and some of the advances we were making with respect to digital tech books. And we also talked about how the landscape of our capital master plan, or how our capital master plan was actually changing, whereas just 10 years before, technology made up about 8% of the capital master plan, grew to 22% in just 5 years, and now we're looking at it almost being 30%. And so what we're seeing, like many large urban school districts, is we have the money, we have the bond and mill levy money, thank goodness for our community and our stakeholders and our supporters. They're continuing to pass elections, and so we can build the buildings if we needed to, but we don't really have the operating dollars to heat, light, and staff them. So we need to think differently about how we approach it. And so investing in technology will really help us with the return on that investment for them. And that really resonated with the community and with the business.
Great. So, Dr. Nemko, Don talked about that aha moment when his CAO came in and kind of laid out this plan for him. Was there a moment in your move into digital that you had that aha moment where you walked in and said, this is it, it's coming to fruition, or whatever it might be?
Let me count the ways. If you go back to the original New Tech High School, it was when employers started trying to hire our kids before they finished, before they were graduating, and offering them salaries higher than the teachers were getting because they had the skills that the businesses wanted. As we moved along and we've done different kinds of digital work, one of the things that Congressman Miller talked about this morning was the famous or infamous Goals 2000, which included every child shall start school ready to learn. But we've never made good on that promise. And so one of the reasons is that kids who come from homes that are not English speaking come to school without having been read to in English. They don't know that how a story goes, where you start and where you end, and nobody's asked them questions about the story. So we found a particular application that we loved, and we brought iPads into a preschool program for 4-year-olds who didn't speak English, who'd never been to preschool just before they went to kindergarten. And our kindergarten teachers were, frankly, appalled. Because you don't give little kids any more screen time. They need to be playing outside and singing and dancing as though we were going to stick them on an iPad for 5 hours a day. And so we just had one class and one teacher who really wanted to do it. And by the second day, the kindergarten teachers came in to look at what we were doing so they could prove how stupid this was. And they became our biggest cheerleaders. When they saw the level of engagement of those little preschool kids who, if too many adults crowded in the room, because everybody wanted to see what we were doing, and so we could have 16, 17 kids and 25 adults standing around, the kids would just put their headphones on to block out our ridiculous noise so they could listen to the stories. And the former opponents, at the end of the 4 weeks, our plan originally was that the 17 kids would carry their iPads to kindergarten, and we'd have 3 or 4 in each class. Those 4 kindergarten teachers looked at us and said, we demand that every kindergarten student have an iPad next year, because this is the way we're going to close the achievement gap.
So there's a lot of questions online, even before this panel, about professional development. So I'm going to ask both Dr. Clark and you, Dr. Patton, this question of, how important is it? What does it look like? And that was one of the questions. What does this look like in this transition to digital? So, Dr. Clark, you want to start?
First of all, Scott, it's vitally important. We can't move this forward without strong training for the teachers. As the person in the room and maybe in the country who has the least per student, the least in districts over 10,000, that was a big challenge. We've lost about $40 million in 3 years. Oh, by the way, the number's 4,077 per student, if you want to know what that is, coming in our general fund. But so we have had to be very creative, because as that $40 million cut came from our legislature, the things that went first were the so-called discretionary, which is a terrible misnomer, things such as professional development, the ability to buy content, do those kinds of things. Those were among the first things to go. By year 3, it was staff and other things. So here we have excited teachers doing a lot of wonderful things, pilots being planted, and the need to do professional development. So in the Meridian way, we sat down and said, what assets do we have? We had a sprinkling of individuals that we call academic coaches or educational technology specialists who serve the whole district, and we knew we had them. And so we did some things such as put them on a flex day, where they could teach classes so that we didn't have to pay the cost for an instructor for those classes. So we offered classes for our teachers. And then really importantly, we developed on our website a sub-site called Teaching 21st Century Skills, which has really taken on a life of its own. It gets thousands of hits every day from all over the country now. We used it to highlight the work that was being done by these innovative teachers. We used it to provide training, and both initial training and also follow-up for folks, so that we were never guilty of doing drive-by kind of professional development. And that's proven to be really, really important. And then we, with the work of some really innovative folks, we established a tech fair in the fall, which now has over 1,000 teachers who come on their own time, and periodic things throughout the year to showcase what these teachers were doing. All of it creates a wonderful cycle of improvement and really bolstering teacher skills, done essentially on a shoestring. So we're hopeful we're going to get maybe one day back this next year, but still, it's a long-term kind of commitment to have to look for alternative ways to deliver quality professional development.
Right. How about you? What role does professional development play in your
So that's
implementation?
huge to us. It's as it is to anyone. But for our digital story, that was where it really, that is the story. So that we can take care of the infrastructure from the district end, but then that professional learning. So what did we do? What we did is we partner with different folks. One, in your case, for Discovery Ed, that's been our biggest partner on this. And we made sure that week before teachers come back, so we started out with district-wide training on pre-service days, so we didn't wait until when they have everything already happening in the classroom. So that was a big help. But since then, we've learned it isn't just any one way you can say this is how you professionally develop folks for digital technology and learning. So we now have a whole plethora of options. So we have webinars that are done then in the afternoons or evenings so that they can get to that training when they want. We made sure to also train administrators, because that's a little miss sometimes. You train teachers and the administrators don't know what they're learning. That's a little miss. So we've made sure to roll that one out simultaneously. We also try and continue to say, since we have that foundation built, where do you go from that foundation? So now we're at the point of customizing. So I've never heard principals, and we have our data dialogue chats where they get an opportunity to go through 16 protocol questions in front of myself and the cabinet, and it's a dialogue back and forth. But what I was so impressed with is we had our day of discovery, week of discovery, where you all came down for a whole week, and school building by school building, you came ahead of time to say, what does your exact school now need at this point? What does and that had a different look depending on who was in the building. So that was yet another new change. And then we did things like STEM conferences. So that involved a lot of digital learning in the STEM conferences. And again, great partners like you guys, when you bring out Reed Timmer, Mr. Storm Chaser, there's no way you can't be motivated. Danny, that builds it bigger, and he's standing up on some unbelievable structure and a mile down below. It's very motivating to our teachers. So that was another way. So there's no one way to do that. Hall and Matt, they've come down and part of our STEM conferences too, and they came into our classrooms ahead of time. So when our teachers came, they were like, wow, look at that. The commercial, having our folks, teachers being on national commercials, and a teacher that was in Michigan in the summer said that he just couldn't believe it. He was telling all about our school system, and there was Collier County in the middle of a Discovery channel, and they were like, wow. So it's never one way. You got to keep coming at it different ways, but the point is to keep coming at it and not stay stale or do the same kind of professional learning when it comes to digital learning.
That's great. So let's open it up to the audience. I have a few more questions, but I'd love to hear from folks either in the room or online. Anybody in the room have a question? I see one over here.
I have a question. I was intrigued by Dr. Patton's comment about co-development of a online tech book, in collaboration with an entity. Can you expand on that? I find it very intriguing.
Right. So the digital online tech book for us was like, for one example that we'll refer to later in today, but we said, okay, what's going to happen to our kids that don't have technology at home? So we worked in collaboration with Discovery Ed, and we came up with a homework protocol so that the kids could still, those that had access could work, but we'd still have another way. So for an example of that was, we worked through to say, let's do science journals. So they could use the tech book during the day, take notes in their science journal, and then the homework came off the science journal part. So that would be one part. When we asked about those records, what kind of records did we want? So we wanted to see, and you took our input to say, well, we'll track how much usage at home, how much is usage. So it was a whole host of our teachers being able to then say, this is what we want to know, and you guys did it. This is what we'd like to do. This is what we do. And then to come back around on year 2 and then say, What else can we do to improve it? In our case, like Miami's case, many languages. So to have then included in like this year's version, vocabulary words, but hear it in their native language, big help. So that, and when I say that, it's still ongoing. You still take all of our suggestions and you still keep improving things. So we appreciate that.
Right, great. I have a question online for Dr. Nemko, a follow-up question. You said kindergarten teachers asked for iPads for every kindergartner. Did that actually happen, and who funded it and how?
Well, we're blessed because we have a public-private partnership with the vintners in Napa County, and they have been helping to raise money for us. And that's why I think it's so important to get your business people into the schools, because number one, they have access to a lot more money than we do. Number two, they're not afraid to ask for it. And number three, when they ask for it, they don't tell you 5 years from now. They say, we need it next month because we want to provide whatever for our students. So that's how we were able to afford the iPads. They paid for 50%, the school district paid for 50%. And as we're talking about professional development, the other thing that they've done, we've partnered with Touro University, which is very close to Napa County. Their education department offers a master's degree in educational technology. So through Napa Learns, which is our partnership, they pay for 50% of a teacher getting a master's degree in educational technology, but the deal is the teacher then comes back and has to share within the county. And we're now working across all 5 districts in Napa County. We're working together on this. The teachers act as coaches. They do workshops. They do informal lunch and learns. And that's another method by which we're providing professional development. And just one quick story, because we're talking about tech books. As part of the League of Innovative Schools, we had the opportunity to pilot the social studies tech book in middle school, and one of my elementary schools is actually K-6. So the 6th grade teacher is piloting the social studies tech book, and he's out of his mind with joy over how fantastic it is and the difference it makes for the kids and yada yada. And he does an after-school demonstration for all the other teachers. So now the K-5 teachers look at me and they say, so how come we don't have that?
Next question.
I don't know. So I say, I will find out and see if we can get you the opportunity to pilot. And God bless you people, you gave me the opportunity, and so my K-5 teachers in this school are piloting. Well, it's a 6-week pilot. When that got turned off, you could have heard the screams from one end of Napa County to the other. They want it back. And so the announcement this morning is like the best thing that ever happened in my life. It will make people so happy.
Wow, if we knew it were that easy. There you go. Yes,
Could
please,
I just
Dr. Clark.
add one thing to what Barbara said? You know, there's a perhaps underappreciated resource out there, and I sort of fell on it by accident. I have a parent council that's comprised of the PTA and PTO presidents in all of the schools. And last year, the state, through an initiative they had, gave school districts some money, and we had, as a district-wide project, putting projectors in all of the schools. I managed to offend a number of PTAs and PTOs because they had done it in their buildings. And so as we were, and they wondered, you know, what they were going to get in place of the money they'd spent. So we dealt with that, but then where we were able to bring them was they now want to be hand in hand with the district as we advance our digital agenda. And they want to know, what is the district's 3-year plan? What is the district going to purchase? What is the district going to find external funds to purchase? Because we want to be a part of that. And they have, you know, over a big district like ours, it's a significant amount of money that they're putting in. And they've moved away from playground equipment and food things and other kinds of incentives and things they've spent their money on. They want to be part of transforming education. So to now be able to bring them in as partners and have those conversations with them not only advances the district's goals, but brings significant resources even to our poorest schools where they have, you know, fundraisers and things to raise that. And they feel like they're really contributing something, and they pressured us to go further out than we might have in our district plan, so that they could feel like they were making the best use of the money. So that's probably a resource almost everyone has in some degree or another, if you can kind of change how those leaders view that and bring them in as part of the team.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. Other questions? Mike. We have a mic for Mike Lawrence?
Yeah.
Mic for Mike? In stereo, please.
Thank you. So a lot of the things we've been talking about today can't just happen with a wave of a magic wand. There has to be folks behind the scenes that are plugging in cables, that are running wire, that are providing bandwidth. Some of those folks can be on the side of enthusiasm towards what you're trying to accomplish, and others maybe not so much. How do you bring those along with you with this vision? How do you get the IT teams? How do you get the CTOs? How do you get the folks who are in a position to make or break that network or make it possible to do? And as a parallel question, how do you reassure them that you're not violating any sort of federal policy or something that might endanger funding by allowing students to have access to some of these tools? I know it's a question that a lot of folks are struggling with in many districts.
Excellent. So the first question really about how do you align your IT resources with your curriculum side? That struggle that we've seen over the years. So how does that play out?
Well, for us, again, through our businesses and that public-private partnership with Napa Learns, because it was one of our vintners who used to be some multimillionaire in Silicon Valley who retired up to Napa, who thinks like a businessman. And he said, you know, part of the problem is you've got 5 different school districts and they're all connected separately and some of them go through one. This is not a way that you do it. He said the way you have to do it is we work together, all 5 districts in the county office, that's 6 entities, and we do a survey and we find out exactly what the needs are to get Wi-Fi in every classroom, in every district by the fall. And then he found the person to go out and do it. I mean, you use the people in your community. It doesn't necessarily have to be an educator. And in fact, when the business people say something, everybody moves faster and there's a lot more agreement than when you're trying to discuss between your administrative office, your curriculum, and your IT. And so it's happening. It's happening. They did the survey. They're starting on getting everybody wired. And that's a huge thing because you asked us how you make it work. I can also tell you how you don't make it work because we've been through some of that too. And one of the things is when you give people digital devices before they have the infrastructure and then they just get discouraged because kids are getting tossed offline and it isn't working. Don't do that. That's not good. Make sure that you have what you need technically. And then roll it out and let your people who are excited share that excitement with the people who aren't so sure.
Great. And Don, do I remember correctly in a conversation we had that your IT department actually reports into you?
It does, as
CFO.
about a year and a half ago.
How did you manage that process with that?
Well, it was much like you were saying, Mike. It was somewhat of a bitter pill for them because it was the way technology had worked in Albuquerque was they took technology up to the schoolhouse door and then stopped, and then it was up to the individual schools to figure out how to make it work beyond the schoolhouse door. So it was an opportunity really to standardize what was happening behind the schoolhouse door, really be a little bit more strategic with respect to our resources to make sure that every school was the same, make sure every school had the connectivity. We had a huge push to get, we have we probably have over 1,000 portables in Albuquerque, which we're desperately trying to get rid of as we build new schools, but there was a huge growth spurt there for a while, so obviously to keep up with it we had portables, but they weren't wired for wireless. So it was about convincing them that this was the right thing to do. It was standardization. It was going to make their jobs a lot easier. And then this was just the first step. With digital textbooks was the first step. We have online streaming. We have online testing with Park and Smarter Balance. All of that's coming. We don't have a choice. So you can complain about it all day long, but the bottom line is we've got to figure out a way to do it. And ultimately, if we do it consistently and strategically and cost effectively, it's going to make all of our lives a lot easier.
So you two are such vocal advocates for educational I think that people would be afraid to disagree on your teams.
Well,
Did you have it?
I was going to say that. I think the thing is, too, it's like what some folks talked about earlier today. It is about the superintendent and their vision and what I'm excited about. Everybody gets the opportunity to be excited about that same thing. So technology is one. So, and I did, being still new as not only a superintendent, but to Collier County, this being the 22nd month, almost 2 years, when I walked in, they knew my passion for technology because I had been from Miami-Dade for 25 years, so I get the sense of urgency every second. And I think that's probably what I've helped bring to Collier is that kind of complacency to bring in that sense of urgency, and technology does that. It allows me to connect 2,300 square miles. And I think our tech guys, we kind of had the opposite. We had outstanding tech guys, but nobody even utilized them the way they could be utilized. So it's a reverse problem. So I do a lot of brainstorming with them. I say, well, here's what I'm thinking. What do you guys think? And they come back and they build systems that are phenomenal. So they have a lot of buy-in at that. And I think it is like keeping them close by. Like, you know, people will say, well, you need to get to Pat and get to the IT guy because he'll see her quicker. And that's good. So it allows it to be seen. Then we try and model it every way that we possibly can, even with our parents. So we have these beautiful, that was built for us, video conferencing, but we have dual screens, and then it's on rollers so it can move. So we've had these beautiful machines for 3 or 4 years, barely used. So I said to him, I said, no, we need to do this with our partners better. So next year, we're going to have an entrepreneur course in all 9 of our high schools. So with 2,300 square miles, how am I going to get speakers to get to all the schools? So we're going to structure it that everybody teaches it 7th period. So when I find a great speaker, he can speak to all of our kids in 1 period. So it's about strategically thinking, and our IT guys are just jumping for joy. The other thing I think we've tried to do is use that video conferencing again, 50 schools scattered through 2,300 square miles. When we try and have a superintendent's district advisory council that we started last year, I knew parents are not going to come. They're not going to drive an hour to be at a meeting for an hour and then drive back home for an hour. So the elementary, the middle, the high school, that feeder pattern of 8 or 9 schools meets, and then what happens is we video conferencing. So I can see them all, and I make sure whatever the topic we talk about for 20 minutes, we call on all 9 schools, and next month they'll do their feeder pattern projects and they'll be able to share. So it's really about leveraging, in my case, walking into good things, but leveraging it to a much greater ability and modeling it, because what we're excited about, and we model it, we just had our principal meeting, they used the QR codes for the first time. It was fascinating to watch them. Oh, and you could see the veteran principals, I didn't even have the app loaded. And it's okay because it's a growing thing, but that's why we got to keep our administrators moving and not just the, because I can see that was a little bit of a miss. Teachers are great, but the leaders in those buildings, just like the leader of the system, have to really be out there.
Exactly.
Scott, fear may be a piece of it, but in my case, it's a different kind of fear. My folks say, oh no, she's leaving town, or she's on the internet, be afraid. So they're probably in panic mode today. But my experience is a little different than the others up here. I've been in the school district just about since the earth was cooling. This is my 9th year as superintendent. I was 10 years as director of stuff and 16 years as principal before that. So the history of technology in our district I can trace back to the very first computer labs that were in the Northwest, and they were in 2 of our buildings. Along that pathway, particularly since the time when I was a director of student achievement, the IT director has been a partner. And we as a district constantly communicated the role and relationship between IT and instruction. But it was about technology to enhance instruction. And as we moved into the digital piece of this, we realized that that had to change. It's about technology and its relationship to learning. One is about teachers, one is about students. We had built the mother of all firewalls. We had built all kinds of protections to protect kids. And teachers could maneuver through that. But when the change came to be about technology to enhance learning, we had to begin to rethink some of those things. Who has access to what is a big one. If you have all the protections in place, your teachers and your students don't have access to all the learning opportunities. I mean, YouTube, you know what the list is. You've all dealt with that. But I think that relationship between the instructional technology folks or the IT folks and the academic side is really, really important. And I recognize, looking back, how vital that was to begin that relationship really early and to foster it. Now, we have terrific IT folks, and they're involved with a lot of other things, but it's the learning that takes priority now, and the decision making is different, and the decisions that come out of that are different when you focus a whole system on the end result, which is students being successful for the 4th R, reality of life when they leave our classrooms. I think that's very different than compartmentalized sorts of systems.
Right. Here's a great question that I hear often asked from Wayland Public Schools in Massachusetts. How do you support an online textbook when you're not one-to-one? So who's not one-to-one up here? Okay, so I think you're all qualified to answer then.
I'll take a stab at
Please.
it first. We're very excited about these pilots that I mentioned, and probably the one that we're most excited about was funded partially by a grant through the League of Innovative Schools and Verizon. We're calling them 21st Century Classrooms. And I went to 5 teachers, this is what started it, and I said to them, if you could design the perfect classroom for the 21st century, what would it be? And I'm not sure that they didn't think I was, kidding them. But in that conversation, we made the funds available to them to do what they conceived. Because we believe that if we're going to have classrooms of the 21st century, we have to change virtually everything about how we deliver instruction. So the furniture in those classrooms looks different, the process is different, and they are developing something we're very excited about, which, for lack of a better term, is a rotational model. You saw it in the Collier piece, and it's quite traditional in some ways in that elementary classrooms have often done stations or rotations. But these are enhanced with digital technology. So in some classrooms, they have 5 iPads, 5 iPods, 5 laptops, an interactive board, perhaps a table, interactive table, and they rotate students through that. Even in our pilot with the Discovery Tech books, some classrooms have enough devices for every student. Some have enough for that rotational, and some of the classrooms are doing it just with the teacher having her computer and the projector. And we're learning a lot about how each of those work, but that's sort of the approach that we're taking, and I think it has a lot of potential. I believe teachers have to be all the way along that blended learning continuum, from maybe that teacher who uses the individual computer with the projector to our fully online classes that we deliver through our digital schoolhouse. So part of it is where teachers are comfortable. Part of it that we are learning is that different subjects and different lessons require different kinds of interaction between the students and the technology. So we're very encouraged about that.
Cam, do you have to be one-to-one?
No, we're not. So we have an array of different methods that we use. Similar that you have some rooms that have more technology in it, some that don't. But we're fortunate again, every room has a interactive whiteboard and dot cam and all that. But I would tell you that we can go further and quicker, and that's why that we'll talk later today, but that's why our next initiative is that bring your own device, because I can get it how we can get even deeper, quicker. But in the meantime, it's not the world's worst thing, because those are those 21st century soft skills that our kids need to learn anyway, which is group work and where we thought we would do a one-to-one, like in classrooms, and had a partner work with us and gave us 30 iPads for science classes, biology specifically for end of course exams. We're very shocked to see, it's one of those things, we had our idea that it was for a classroom, not one of our high schools are using it that way. They're only using it for 5 in a room for groups. So actually now 6 classrooms are using them instead of just the 1 biology classroom. So it's interesting, again, we think one way, but then the reality can be different, so.
Great. Don, shifting gears, if you could do it all over again, from your perspective as a CFO, would you have changed anything?
Wow. Yeah, I would have, but again, you can always second guess it. But the bottom line is we did hit a home run with it. It was sort of a ready, fire, aim approach, but it worked, and it forced us to move quickly with respect to our infrastructure, and I think that's probably what I would have done a little bit better job of is I didn't have IT at the time, but I got it through the course of implementing digital textbooks. I would have really made sure that collaboration was there between the curriculum side of the house and the technology to make sure that everything was in place, that they had what they needed to really make it work. Like you were saying, that it really needed to be there in advance and as much as you could. Because it's one thing to buy a bunch of devices that no one uses, and then they just get discouraged with them, and then they start to collect dust over time. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened, but we really had to step up to the plate and move quickly with getting the infrastructure in place, and we're continuing to do so.
Great. And Barb, you mentioned you've been doing this since the early 90s. What's your big learning? What's your big takeaway from all this?
Well, the biggest mistake that we made at one point was we tried to take what we had at New Technology High School, which is a kind of a specialty school because people have to apply to get in. We don't take them according to a GPA. It's a lottery system, but you still have to want to go there. We tried to get that into the existing comprehensive high schools, and we moved too fast. And the model that New Tech had was they had 2 teachers who collaborated. So you might have English and history. But the model was in one room with 60 kids. And for some reason, when we tried to move that out into the existing comprehensive high schools, that was the model in our head. And so we asked, of course, for volunteers, but then we paired them up. So it's like suddenly telling Scott and Linda, you're now married and you're going to live in this room 5 days a week all day long, and maybe you don't even like each other. That was a mistake because that brought up a whole lot of resistance that didn't have to be there. And so we had to fight through that kind of negativity for a while in trying to implement it at the existing high schools. Now we have a 4-year plan for how it's all going to roll out. And we start as it's rolling into even elementary schools with the teachers who are really excited, and then we invite everybody in to come and see it. We invite the parents, we invite the business people, we invite the administrators, we have tours of the schools, and there are so many amazing things that you can do. And we have an elementary teacher who is, the kids are studying body systems. And so what she did was she had her brother, who's a physician on the other side of the country, Skype in. And he talked to the kids about 4 patients, and these are their symptoms. And then the kids had to work in groups to figure out if these are their symptoms, what body systems involved, how does it work, how should it work, what were the problems, what would they recommend. And that kind of excitement, when other teachers walk in and see it, how can they not want to participate in really using technology? Because in its many aspects, you can do as much as you can imagine. So yeah, I would not pair people unwillingly ever again.
We have one final question from the room. Yes, Dean.
We use a lot of words that sort of get used a lot of times, and sometimes we don't put definitions to them. And I think there's a really big difference between using technology to enhance learning and to transform it. So when you think about that, and just, I don't know if you can come up with something, what's the image or the picture that you want to tell people when you say, here's what this actually is, in terms of pedagogy, in terms of what the classroom, how is it transformed, how is it different, maybe just in terms of a visual that you can create around to help people understand that's not the way it's been.
That's a great question. Linda?
Well, initially, I think technology to enhance instruction was putting certain tools in the hands of a teacher, where they could bring additional resources into the room, use it in their lessons, and so on. I think the way we want to communicate it now in terms of enhancing learning, engaging students, it's about putting those tools in the hands of students, putting them in charge to a greater extent of their own learning, having them actively engaged. One of the things I've said is that I think any content we buy must meet 4 criteria. It must be aligned to the standards, it must be up to date, it must be motivational and highly engaging. I can't think of a textbook adoption I ever made that would meet those criteria. On the other hand, the Discovery Tech books and the Discovery Learning as a whole, they're like the gold standard for meeting those. To me, that's the difference. It's the quality of what we're putting in the hands and the fact that we're using technology, putting it in the hands of students to be more actively engaged in their learning and to really be in charge of their learning to a greater extent. It's the no sage on the stage. It's kids who are invested in their own learning. It's a very different model.
And I think just the word teaching, that's one of the things that I've been trying to really talk a lot more about, is not use teacher as the word, but use facilitator as a word. Because otherwise, when you say teacher, people kind of get that mental picture. So we're trying to move that to really have that personalized learning. And some very examples that I've shared with people when they ask me that is, because I'm a very concrete kind of person at times too, to say, we're asking better questions. We're getting kids to problem solve, analyze, and think, because if you ask them too low of a comprehensive question, name 10 words, in 2 seconds they go to Google and there's the answer. So the teacher's like, whoa, whoa, what happened there? You know, that used to take 10 minutes to do. Now it's a 2-second answer. So what we're also doing is gaining time. I watched a little youngster and I was asking him, he was doing a personalized assignment. So I said, so what do you think about, you know, your teacher let you use your iPod for that? And he says, well, it's 10 times better. Last year we had to do something similar. I had to go through all these catalogs. I knew I was looking for a yacht. That's what I want, da-da-da-da. So when I had a more conversation with the teacher, and she said, we're getting more in the day because they can get to information quicker. So sometimes I think giving concrete examples to people that they can understand, Google an answer. Oh, yeah, I can answer, but I can't Google, compare this to that.
Please join me in thanking our incredible leaders today.